Who are these people?
What's up, everybody? This is another episode of Iron and News with me, Reef Breland, and my friend Collin Radix-Carter, aka Care Bear. How are you, friend?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. You have a story for us this evening. You
I
wanted to
do have
rant
a
a bit?
story. Yes, I do. I know
Okay.
people enjoy the rants, and I don't do them as often as I used to when we first started.
Hmm.
But rant nonetheless. I've been kind of holding off on this for a while. I've actually wanted to talk about this for a while, but given certain personalities kind of talking about it this week, I figured put it out there and just kind of have it out there because I'm sure we're going to refer to this. Um, More in the future. And actually, this is kind of more personal to me, given that I'm a teacher. But yeah, we're going to talk about critical race theory. And I was inspired to do this in light of a stream that I was a part of, and people were saying stuff about it, which is not.
Hmm.
So I want to kind of help clear the air as to what it is and what it isn't. And I think ultimately kind of talk about what's, as you can see, there are elephant trunks, but what is really the elephant in the room as far as the issue, so to speak.
Ooh, I see. I see what
So,
you did there. I see what you
well,
did there.
actually, I didn't create all of that. I just found a picture of that, but
Hmm.
I just added DeSantis, Whoopi, and me, and Tenderheart in there. But I
Gotcha.
think but I think the idea is that is to me, it's kind of a red herring in
Hmm.
terms of a larger issue that I think should be addressed,
Makes
which is
sense.
not. So,
Cool.
and then there's obviously some stuff behind it that kind of puts into question what DeSantis did, but yeah, we'll talk about it. So yeah, hold on, let me get my thing ready. So if you can pull up the slide for me, please.
Yes, sir.
Um, Wait, just want to make sure it catches up. There we go.
And then you go
There
back.
we
Yep,
go.
we got
All
it.
right.
Yeah.
So there we go.
Yeah.
All right. So this is an article from, unfortunately, Fox News. But
Mm.
sometimes they do decent coverage depending on what it is. This is written by Hannah Panbrack, where she states that Whoopi Goldberg demands to see evidence of CRT being taught in schools. Show me the school book. There is a clip to this. I'm not going to play it due to reasons of YouTube. I'm sure we're going to hit with a copyright strike. So I'm just going to read what she said. But I think you'll get the point anyhow.
Mm.
So, so she writes, co-host Whoopi Goldberg demanded evidence of critical race theory being taught in schools during Tuesday's episode of The View and said, show me the school book. I wish somebody would show me a book. Okay, show me the school book that everybody is talking about that's teaching CRT, she said. Fellow co-host Sunny Hostin claimed that it was only being taught at Harvard Law School. I want to see the one they're doing it with little kids. I want to see that book, but I'm demanding it now because I'm tired of it. You know, that book you think that your kids have been learning is a book about what's happened in our country. And the more you try to avoid things that have already happened, we're going to be facing it again, she said.
Mm.
While discussing Governor Ron DeSantis as a possible off-ramp for former President Donald Trump, Goldberg said the Florida governor is running a state where he decides what is being taught in schools. Here's the thing to keep in mind. Ron DeSantis is now running a state where he decides what can be taught in schools or not. So you know the off-ramp is like, I'm not sure it's an off-ramp, Goldberg said. Co-host Sarah Haynes said DeSantis was the lesser of two evils. No, because you have a lot of racism going on and a little bit of insanity, Goldberg added. Florida recently dismissed an AP American Studies course because it included elements of critical race theory and Black queer studies. As presented, the content of this course is explicitly contrary to Florida law and significantly lacks educational value, the state's Department of Education rejection letter said. In the future, should College Board be willing to come back to the table with lawful, historically accurate content, the education department will always be willing to reopen the discussion. The move was criticized by the White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre. It is incomprehensible to see that this is what this ban, or this block, to be more specific, that DeSantis has put forward, Jean-Pierre said. If you think about the study of Black Americans, this is what he wants to block. And again, these types of actions aren't new, especially from what we're seeing in Florida, sadly. So, actually, let me go back a second. But I noticed a view. So obviously, Whoopi has kind of meh takes, and I think very surface level takes more often than not. But what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I mean, I know from what we covered a little bit on streams before, you know, it's like CRT is this like kind of niche legal argument, right? Like officially, like that's where the term was
We're
coined.
going to get into that more in the article that I'm going to read later. But yeah,
I did want to
go ahead.
I didn't want to speak to, like, as a Florida boy myself, I ain't learned none of that, like, ever.
Right.
You know,
but
like the amount of Black history that, like, I had it all in any American, like, history course, you know.
Right. But did you take any APs?
I tried to senior year, and they only had like AP American history and AP whatever, and they didn't include. I was like friends with all the AP kids. None of their books had that in there. So,
well, I do want to bring this up because now remember, this was an AP course, right?
Yeah.
That got struck down. So
which is you can request to be in AP if your like grades are
good
enough.
It has to be a request.
Yeah.
2, it's typically, well, I took AP my sophomore year.
Yeah.
US history. Hated it, so I went down to honors.
Yeah, I should have done dual enrollment. We had that at our school, and I should have done that instead of like I like worked real hard like my what's your third year in high school? Sophomore, right?
Junior.
One of those.
Junior's third, sophomore second.
Okay, gotcha. But yeah, like my junior year, I worked real hard and got like all my teachers to give me the go ahead for like AP, right? And it was like an ADHD kid that was difficult, and like none of the AP like it was like the AP had people in it forever already, and like all of them were already there. So like they got stuff over the summer they had to do, and like tons of stuff, and like I came in not having that, and they were like, no, bumped me back down.
You actually bring up a good point, because I do want to mention that, and I think that's something that people are not mentioning in this discussion as far as DRT. But I do want to talk about APs for a second.
Yeah.
Because APs, those of you who've been in high school, especially in the US, would know, APs are typically college level courses that you take in high school. That's basically the idea of what it is. So
kind of sort of.
They're typically kind of sort of, but the idea is that you're taking like, well, you can use that towards college credit. Sometimes, depending on the course, but more often than not, it's the idea. It's a higher level course. Comparable to what you might get in college.
Looks real good on your resume.
Exactly. So, but those are often electives. So it's not classes that you just take. These are classes, as you said already, that either you have to have the recommendation of a teacher to have you get in, or like you have to take them like usually when you're like later in high school, like junior, senior year, typically. Although, as I said, in my case, I took my AP history in like my sophomore year. But I did want to mention that because if we look at the next slide, this is an article from the Education Trust, where they say Black and Latino students shut out of advanced coursework opportunities. And I'll explain more why I wanted to include this in regards to this conversation.
Makes sense already. You know?
Right. So if you can zoom in, please.
Kind of, sort of. It's weird and long.
There we go. Yeah, it's very light. And and
It's
it
all right, I
got
got you.
scrambled in the reader view, so I had to do it this way.
I'll try to like follow you.
Yeah. Black and Latino students across the country have unequal access to advanced coursework. You can actually zoom out because I think I could see it a little bit.
I can do this.
Yeah, that's fine. That's great. Which means they often miss out on vital learning opportunities that can set them up for success in college and careers. Another different conversation about college, but another conversation for another day. A new report and state-by-state data tool from the Education Trust examined why these students are shut out, how widespread these practices are, and what policymakers at state, district, and school level can do to increase students' access to advanced learning. So basically, the idea is that, like, typically, like more traditionally, Black and Latino students are often not given the advantage of taking AP courses or being shut out of them.
Yeah.
So, but I'll go on. Zoom in. Thank you. So actually this article is in the description. I'm not going to use all of it, but just more of the pertinent stuff in regards to this. So high school, Black and Latino students are locked out of AP. Black students make up 50% of high schoolers nationwide, but only 9% of students enrolled in at least one AP course. Nearly a quarter of students are Latino, but only 21% of students enrolled in AP courses are Latino. So although, like, depending on the makeup of a school, not many Black and Latino students are taking AP courses just generally across the board. So I do want to make that clear. It's not like, so we're talking about this course that was blocked by the state board in Florida.
Right.
It's not as if like Black people can automatically just take that course.
Yeah.
Like it would have been very few to begin with.
Yeah.
And then even then it would be an elective. And we'll go into that more on the next slide. Using data from the U.S. Department of Ed's 2015-16 Civil Rights Data Collection and Common Core of Data, inequalities in advanced coursework was driving them of what leaders can do, shows that nationally there are two drivers of these equalities. One, schools that serve mostly Black and Latino students do not have many seats in advanced classes as schools that serve fewer Black and Latino students. And two, especially racially diverse schools deny Black and Latino students access to those seats that they do have. Additionally, fair access doesn't mean sufficient access. Too many students attend schools that do not offer these opportunities at all. So I think that's kind of missing out of the conversation, is that the more racially diverse the school is, the less likely that you see students of color taking APs.
Yeah.
Or if they are in a predominantly Black Latino school, they may not have those opportunities
Options
available.
at all. Gotcha.
Right.
Okay.
So basically, like, the idea is kind of, DeSantis is kind of, to me, alluding to the idea of like, oh, every Black student will be able to take this course. Not the case. Like, it would be very few. But as they said, it's more racially diverse schools that lock out Black and Latino students. So that kind of implies to me, it may not necessarily be about the students of color. It may be more about the white students who might decide to take these classes and kind of think about, oh, this might be something I haven't considered before in terms of African-American history that I personally think might be more worrisome to someone like DeSantis, more than the fact of over Black and Latino students taking a course that is more representative of their culture.
Their framing is so weird too, because like it's interesting to bring this point up, because for like their framing is that like it teaches white kids that like somehow they're inherently evil, which like that's not the case. I don't imagine. Like, so, but it's like, it's interesting that like, well, why would they feel that, and it's because, yeah, these classes are all the affluent kids who were able to get good grades and able to get like those opportunities, and now they're in AP classes.
Right.
You know?
So, but yeah, I want to continue this but I think a lot of what you said will apply later to the other article that I pulled up for this.
Right.
So zoom out, please.
Yes, sir.
All right. So key findings show Black and Latino students are successful in advanced courses when given the opportunity. Black and Latino students are not fairly represented in advanced courses. There are too few course offerings and limited availability. Not enough courses are offered in schools across the country. Not enough total seats are available in schools serving the most Black and Latino students. Among schools that offer advanced courses, Black and Latino students are often denied access to those courses. This is especially true in racially diverse schools. So it kind of goes along with the fact that more often than not, Black and Latino students are shut out of these courses anyway.
Yeah.
So again, it just kind of leads to framing in terms of, and this is kind of where I get a little frustrated with Whoopi in the sense like making it about elementary school, which we will get to in a second. But the idea of this course in particular would be very specific to high school. That's what I think that where she didn't make that distinction. AP, you've taken high school.
Yeah.
And technically, the idea is that you are taking those level courses in high school. But the idea is that Black and Latino students often do not have access or are not able to take those courses anyway. So I feel like the issue should have been more towards that. And I think if DeSantis really was doing his job, he should be promoting more AP courses, especially in more racially diverse schools or predominantly Black and Latino schools to give students that access in terms of if they wanted to go to college or at minimum having that kind of availability to them in those schools, which often they don't.
Yeah.
So this is an article. This is a good article, in my opinion, on what is so. Like putting that all in context. Now let's get into RCT, and what it is and what it isn't, and what the true issues is surrounding CRT. So this is an article from Education Week, written by Stephen Sawcock, where he writes, "What is critical race theory and why is it under attack?" This is kind of a long article. It's not, I didn't use all of it. Again, link is in the description if you want to read all of it. But I think it's substantial enough for people to kind of understand what it is and what it isn't. So he writes, "Is critical race theory a way of understanding how American racism has shaped public policy or a diverse, divisive discourse that puts people of color against white people? Liberals and conservatives are in sharp disagreement. The topic has exploded in the public arena this spring. I think, if I remember, this was written in 2020, I believe. Just to give some contents. Especially in K through 12, where numerous state legislators are debating bills seeking to ban its use in the classroom. In truth, the divides are not nearly as neat as they may seem. The events of the last decade have increased public awareness about things like housing segregation, the impacts of criminal justice policy in the 1990s, and the legacy of enslavement on Black Americans. But there's much less consensus of what the government's role should be in righting these past wrongs. Add children and schooling into the mix, and the debate becomes especially volatile. School boards, superintendents, and even principals and teachers are already facing questions about critical race theory, and there are significant disagreements even among experts about its precise definition, as well as how its tenets should inform K-12 policy and practice. This explainer is meant to only as a starting point to help educators. Well, most of you who are watching are not necessarily educators, but this still applies to you. If those of you who are yelling, this is wrong or whatever, hopefully you'll have a better understanding of it. Grasp core aspects of the current debate. Just what is critical race theory anyway? Critical race theory is an academic concept that is more than 40 years old. The core idea is that race is a social construct and that racism is not merely the product of individual bias or prejudice, but also something embedded in legal systems and policies. The basic tenets of critical race theory, or CRT, emerged out of a framework for legal analysis in the late 70s and early 1980s, created by legal scholars Derek Bell, Kimberly Crenshaw, and Richard DeLago, among others. A good example is when, in the 1930s, government officials literally drew lines around area deemed poor financial risks, often explicitly due to racial composition of its inhabitants. Redlining. Banks subsequently refused to offer mortgages to Black people in those areas. Oh, wait, did I?
No, that's it.
Yeah, I got it. That's it. Today, those same patterns of discrimination live on through factually race-blind policies like single-family zoning that prevents the building of affordable housing in advantaged majority white neighborhoods and thus stymies racial desegregation efforts. CRT also has ties to other intellectual currents, including the work of sociologists and literary theorists who study links between political power, social organization, and language. And its ideas have since informed other fields like the humanities, the social sciences, and teacher education. This academic understanding of critical race theory differs from representation in recent popular books, and especially from its portrayal by critics, often, though not exclusively, conservative Republicans. Critics charge that the theory leads to negative dynamics, such as a focus on group identity over universal shared traits, divides people into oppressed and oppressor groups, and urges intolerance. Thus, there is a good deal of confusion over what CRT means, as well as its relationship to other terms like anti-racism and social justice, with which it's often conflated. To an extent, the term critical race theory is now cited as the basis for all diversity and inclusion efforts, regardless of how much it's actually informed those programs. One conservative organization, the Heritage Foundation, recently attributed a whole host of issues to CRT, including the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests, LGBTQ clubs in schools, diversity training in federal agencies and organizations, California's recent ethnic studies model curriculum, the free speech debate on college campuses, and alternatives to exclusionary discipline, such as the Promise program in Broward County, Florida, that some families blame for the Parkland school shootings. When followed to its logical conclusion, CRT is destructive and rejects the fundamental ideas on which our constitutional republic is based, the organization claimed. Scroll up. Okay, so what does this have to do with K through 12 education? Scholars who practice critical race theory in education look at how policies and practices in K through 12 education contribute to persistent racial inequalities in education and advocate for ways to change them. Among the topics they've studied, racial segregated schools, the underfunding of majority Black and Latino school districts, disproportionate disciplining of Black students, barriers to gifted programs and selective admission high schools, and curricula that reinforce racist ideas. Critical race theory is not a synonym for culturally relevant teaching, which emerged in the 1990s. This teaching approach seeks to affirm student ethnic and racial backgrounds and is intellectually rigorous, but it's related in that one of its aims is to help students identify and critique the causes of social inequality in their own lives. So I think that's a key point. Like, you can argue that critical race theory is somewhat synonymous with culturally relevant teaching, which is what I do.
Right.
But it's not the same thing. It's you can argue that it may be an offshoot of that in terms of, and I'll get to that in a second. So let me just read that. Actually, I don't think I cut that. I think I made a edit there. But essentially, it's for me thinking in terms of, for example, like if I have a few Black students in my class in the classroom that's predominantly white, for example. How, as a teacher, do I make sure that, one, especially since I teach preschool, that they feel comfortable in terms of, just within the community, because it's predominantly white. Many of them, some of them may not necessarily have been in that kind of school before. But two, having understanding for many of them, like their background or whatever, but not just for them, for all kids who may have some cultural differences. How do I ensure that my curriculum reflects who they are and introduce it in a way that's more affirming in the classroom and in a larger sense at my school? That's what I think about in terms of, I'm not necessarily thinking about the law aspect of CRT in terms of like what we see in terms of redlining and all that other stuff. I'm not thinking of that, per se. What I'm thinking about is directly how my students are represented and having materials in a way that they don't feel like they are not getting access, that they have as much equality in the access of what is available to them at their schools as possible, regardless of who they are. That's kind of in K through 12. I'll say actually more K through 8, really like early high school is more, I think, what schools are thinking about. They're not thinking in terms of like, and again, if they are talking about like RCT baby in high school, that again, that would be more of an elective that students are choosing to take versus a requirement that you have to learn it in this way. I saw that you nodded your head in agreement. So
yeah, no,
wondering.
It's interesting to see the differences. It feels like CRT is like a much more mature offshoot of cultural teaching, which you say is like much more prevalent, Right.
It's much more prevalent, and I'll argue a lot more developmentally appropriate.
You're saying the difference is more like cultural stuff is like about historical culture, whatever, but CRT is like the actual legal ramifications of that cultural.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Which I'm not teaching that.
Right.
I'm not teaching that to preschoolers.
Right.
I can't teach that to preschoolers. That's
No.
culturally. I think again, in a context maybe in high school, which can be a part of a history class, that's something again in an AP course that would be, I would argue, a little bit more appropriate to learn about.
Gotcha.
You're not going to do that in elementary school.
Yeah.
So, so that's where Whoopi is like, where's the show me the textbook? You're not going to find it in elementary school more often than not. There may be some schools, and they usually are private, that might, and I think that might be part of this issue, is that some private schools are trying to do this or some way, shape, or form in elementary schools. I have to kind of look in that a little bit more to see exactly what it is.
Sure.
But I will probably guess that's more culturally relevant teaching, if anything else.
Yes.
I don't necessarily believe that they're teaching about
it's just when those two things
like,
overlap probably is
they
the problem.
overlap.
Yeah.
They overlap, but they're not exactly the same thing.
Yes.
But I think, but I think that's kind of where the confusion is. And I think this is why educators need to be a part of the conversation in this, because politicians are not necessarily going to know the nuances of what it is or what it isn't, that they're able to kind of speak for us, when I think really it should be the opposite,
Right.
Like there should be more teacher voice in terms of what this is. But anyway, I'm going to continue. So along with that, many educators support, to one degree or another, culturally relevant teaching and other strategies to make schools feel safe and supportive of Black students and other underserved populations. Students of color make up the majority of school-age children, but they don't necessarily identify these activities as CRT related, as we were just saying. As one teacher educator put it, the way we usually see any of this in a classroom is, have I thought about how my Black children feel? Excuse me, and made a space for them so that they can be successful. That is a level I think of it stays at for most teachers. Like others interviewed for this explainer, the teacher educator did not want to be named out of fear of online harassment. An emergent subtext among some critics is that curricular excellence can't coexist alongside culturally responsive teaching or anti-racist work. Their argument goes that efforts to change grading practices or make the program less Eurocentric will ultimately harm Black students or hold them to a less higher standard. Okay, not sure how that is, but whatever. As with CRT in general, its popular representation in schools has been far less nuanced. A recent poll by the advocacy group Parents Defending Education claimed some schools were teaching that white people are inherently privileged, while Black and other people of color are inherently oppressed and victimized. Achieving racial justice and equality between racial groups requires discriminating against people based on their whiteness, and that the United States was founded on racism. This is what I hear a lot in terms of CRT.
Right.
Thus, much of the current debate appears to spring not from the academic text, but from fear among critics that students, especially white students, will be exposed to supposedly damaging or self-demoralizing ideas. That is what you all just mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Is probably the real elephant in the room here. It's not so much the students of color, it's more the white students and what they might be starting to think about. Why some students, district officials have issued mission statements, resolutions, and spoken about changes in their policies using some of the discourse of CRT, it's not clear to what degree educators are explicitly teaching the concepts or even using curriculum materials or other methods that implicitly draw on them. For one thing, scholars say much scholarship in ACT is written in academic language or published in journals not easily accessible to K-12 teachers. So what is going on with these proposals to ban critical race theory in schools? As of mid-May, legislation purporting to outlaw CRT in schools has passed in Idaho, Iowa, Oklahoma, and Tennessee, and have been proposed in various other state houses. The bills are so vaguely written that it's unclear what they will affirmatively cover. Could a teacher who wants to talk about a factual instance of state-sponsored racism, like the establishment of Jim Crow, the series of laws that prevented Black Americans from voting or holding office, and separating them from white people in public places, it could be considered in violation of these laws. It's also unclear whether these new bills are constitutional or whether they permissibly restrict free speech.
I like your little Freudian slip on Grim Joe, but you know.
Yeah. It would be extremely difficult in any case to police what goes on inside hundreds of thousands of classrooms. But social studies educators fear that such laws could have a chilling effect on teachers who might self-censor their own lessons out of concern for parent or administrative complaints. As English teacher Mike Stein told Chalkboard Beat Tennessee about the new law, history teachers cannot adequately teach about the Trail of Tears, the Civil War, and the Civil Rights Movement. English teachers will have to avoid teaching almost any text by an African-American author because many of them mention racism to various extents.
So pause. I don't, because that seems like cultural studies to me. Like it seems like the actions against CRT have like more overreaching ramifications than what CRT actually is.
But again, and this is something that, you know, just for me on the ground, this is what I know many of my colleagues are concerned about.
Yeah.
Is the idea of like what should be taught and what shouldn't be. And the idea of like, again, our thing is making sure that students feel represented, but like to teach truthfully, you know, especially, you know, social studies / history, the realities of what happened in this country, especially like as students get older. And the idea that you can't necessarily, or teachers feeling not comfortable in teaching factual stuff about history that may not be the pretty stuff, you know, like I think ultimately is causing a problem, you know, for teachers. Like you shouldn't have to be afraid to teach what has been proven to be true, you know,
Right.
given our history. And I think, and again, because the idea with CRT is so vague, there's no telling what, could be taught or what shouldn't be, and so like it doesn't help teachers to, have more of a firm foundation in what they feel is appropriate to teach their students. Because again, it may not even necessarily be politicians, it could be parents who might be like, I don't want to have you teach my kid about, the civil rights movement.
Right.
And actually, there may be another implication in this that I think is very interesting that he makes that I will get to. But that's an issue that teachers are thinking about.
Okay.
The laws could also become a tool to attack other pieces of the curriculum, including ethnic studies and action civics, an approach to civics education that asks students to research local civic problems and propose solutions. That's another part of it. I didn't necessarily think of that. Like the idea that, which kind of goes along with what we talk about in terms of thinking of students in terms of activism.
Yes.
What does that look like?
Yeah.
So in order for them to do that, they have to know some aspects of CRT. Again, I'll argue this might be more filled out like when they get into high school, where you talk about redlining and all that kind of stuff, which I think by that point would be a lot more appropriate for high school students to kind of understand. But then to ask them to form solutions to that is kind of questionable now, whether that should be taught. So basically the idea of like, you shouldn't learn how to organize or do any activism in terms of, because this might be a CRT element that students should know.
It's so weird because it's like, it's not saying that like, it's not saying that CRT isn't like their whole thing is that by teaching the fact that the system is inherently racist, that means white people are inherently racist, and therefore making white people feel bad, white kids or whatever. It's like, yeah, but it's not saying that should be the case. Like
no one's saying that should be the case, but the idea is like, moving forward, what should be done?
Right.
Because that's kind of what I say. That's what education should be.
Yes.
It's the idea of learning how to be better.
Mm-hmm.
And how to be aware of the situations that you may or may not have had privilege from, but being aware of these issues and having the skills to possibly try and fix those issues. But I think more importantly, being able to, and I think honestly, this is the true elephant of the room. Again, I think more of the concern is white kids learning about this stuff and wanting to lead the charge of any, like, I'll say in our language, direct action towards politicians who are bought off by corporations that do not want this to happen.
Right.
They're not scared of me.
No.
They're not scared of me. They're scared of you.
These new hippie kids. They're
right.
We're
more scared of you. So even though you're middle class, but with enough yous out there who are pushing for this, that's going to make more of an impact than, let's say, me, doing it with a group of Black people or even people of color, who might be pushing for direct action. So again, I feel that this is kind of a roundabout way of saying we don't want white kids to give them ideas of how to push for change.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I get out of this, honestly. So actually, there are more implications to this that I bring up that I think are also interesting. How is this related to other debates over what's taught in the classroom amid K-12 culture wars? The charge that schools are indoctrinating students in a harmful theory or political mindset is a long-standing one, historians note. CRT appears to be the latest salvo in this ongoing debate. In the early early and mid 20th century, the concern was about socialism or Marxism. The Conservative American Legion, beginning in the 1930s, sought to rid schools of progressive-minded textbooks that encouraged students to consider economic inequality. Decades later, the John Birch Society raised similar criticisms about school materials. As with CRT criticisms, the fear was that students would be somewhat harmed by exposure to these ideas. So even back a century ago,
Yeah.
the idea of socialist
Yeah, no commie stuff here. Yeah, that's bad.
No, right. That's bad. Which is funny enough, is making a complete turnaround to that now,
Yes.
especially like with Gen Z. So, as the school-age population became more diverse, these debates have been inflected through the lens of race and ethnic representation, including disagreements over multiculturalism and ethnic studies, the ongoing canon wars over which text should make up the English curriculum, and the so-called Ebonics debates over the status of Black vernacular English in schools.
Yeah.
Which was a thing in the 90s.
Yep.
Wait.
There it goes.
Okay, there we go. In history, the debates have focused on the balance among patriotism and American exceptionalism on one hand, and the country's history of exclusion and violence towards indigenous people and enslavement of African Americans on the other, between its ideals and its practices. Those tensions led to the implosion of a 1994 attempt to set national history standards. A current example that has fueled much of the recent round of CRT criticism is the New York Times 1619 Project, which sought to put the history and the effects of enslavement, as well as Black Americans' contributions to democratic reforms, at the center of American history. The culture wars are always, at some level, battled out within schools, historians say. It's because they're nervous about broad social things, but they're talking in language of school and school curriculum, said one historian of education. That's the vocabulary, but the actual grammar is anxiety about shifting social power relations. So I think really that's really it right there. It's not so much like, it's more the fear of, in my opinion, this shift from thinking in terms of a more capitalistic mindset to a more socialist mindset that no one is saying, but they're using culture and race to kind of muddy the waters a little bit but really the idea is like, we don't want people to start thinking in terms of more socialist ideas.
Yeah.
That, it might lead to more in terms of what we talk about on this show pretty much every week.
Yep.
So honestly, I think that is really the true elephant in the room, is the idea of wanting to keep the status quo, wanting to keep basically us fighting over this by using race as more. I think honestly the idea of CRT is really a red herring in terms of keeping the status quo as it is, so that only certain kids will be able to get the full rights of quote unquote American dream, whatever that means. And then the rest of us have to basically fight it out amongst each other, while the elite sit back, So it's a way to protect the status quo, versus addressing the true issues that will actually lead to more social change and more equal footing among the masses, in this country. I think is really at the core of this.
Makes sense.
Think about that when the next time you start screaming CRT is bad. And I don't think, again, it's inherently wrong. Me personally, I don't think so. But you have to give the appropriate context. And again, there has to be at a certain grade level what I think is appropriate to start talking about.
What they don't like is that by teaching CRT, The solutions to those problems are what they don't like. That's the main issue. It's the solutions to that.
And God forbid our students actually think of something in terms
It's
of
like
helping themselves.
the things that you as a teacher would do to tell white people that they're not inherently racist is like, that's what they're worried about you teaching them, honestly.
Right.
So,
which is not the case. As I said, my job as a teacher is to give them the tools to basically make change in their society, that they'll be unrelenting and unapologizing in, and again, I work in an affluent neighborhood in DC. My kids are privileged.
Yeah.
So for all intents and purposes, they will be okay. But my role as their teacher is kind of like, you have privilege, like whether you realize it, you can go a lot further than probably even me.
Yeah.
You know, reality is by the time they get to my age, there are things that you have access to that most people, especially within the working class, do not. And it's your responsibility, if you are in these positions, to be unrelenting in thinking in terms of what is needed in terms of progressive policy that you're able and willing to fight for it.
Yeah.
You know, you will be in that position. So that's kind of what I teach, you know, and, you know, like, obviously I can't do that, you know, and I'm not going to do it as far as teaching my students law. No, they're too young for that. But I think in high school is where those conversations should start in terms of thinking like,
you know, no one would be upset if you were like, here's toddler's first gavel. We're going to do our like mock courtroom proceeding. We're going to have a jury. Like, no one would be upset about that.
right.
You know?
But you make a good point. High school is when you'll start doing that stuff, having mock trial like meetings and all that kind of stuff in whatever clubs you're going to. You're starting to form your own identity in terms of the world around you. And I think by then you should have some of that understanding on the realities of history and like on this country and this world and how that's basically impacts you. And you have the responsibility to kind of figure out how to solve that. Because if we don't have that, then it's just going to be more of this capitalistic mindset of, you know, we're just going to use you as a drone within the capitalistic machine. We don't want you asking questions. We don't want you to like second guess the system. We just want you to be a good little drone that will do what we asked you to do once you get out of college and get that corporate job, you know, and you just do that and basically until your retirement.
Yes.
That's kind of basically, and if you're lucky, you might get married and have kids along the way. That's kind of.
Yep. Be a good mouse in the rat race and.
Right.
You know.
So it's interesting that this, you know, I forgot his name right now, but like he writes in terms of thinking in terms of like, this is really not so much about race. And we talked about this with Danny Haifon's article back over the holidays. This is related to capitalism.
Yeah.
Through and through. You know, it's just really race is used as a cover for the true idea of why they're afraid of CRT. You know?
Yeah.
But again, even in that, long story short, no one in grade for K through 12 necessarily is teaching it. And I'll argue even in high school, there's not explicit in the way that you'll have maybe in law school. There may be some aspects of it that are, but I feel by high school, it's more appropriate to at least introduce those ideas. That if they want to go to college and want to learn them more, then they have the ability to do that. But I guarantee you people, no one definitely in grade school is teaching CRT. So get off your ass. Hopefully now we've educated you now what CRT is. And now hopefully you will not be able to say anything that is kind of conjuncture of what it really is meant to be.
Yeah.
So hopefully you learned something today.
Cool.
And that's my rant.
I did, for sure. All right. As always, please like and subscribe. You know, hit that bell even if you want to. I don't know what it does. Supposedly something. Leave a comment. You know,
It lets you know whenever we have, we do our live stream typically on Wednesday nights, and then we will have clips from not included. So you can call this like extra clips from
Yep.
as extensions of INN News throughout the week as well. So if you subscribe, you'll know when we'll have a clip up. Sometimes there'll be a premiere where usually either Reef or I or both of us will be in the chat, so you can talk to us.
Yep.
But
yeah,
so
follow at Get Indie News on Twitter. You can find all the links to all of that at indienews.network. You'll see that scrolling across that ticker at the bottom. Links are in the description below as always. But yeah, anything else? I think that's it, right?
so sorry it was long, but it needed to be
No,
said.
you're good.
Oh.
So as always, labels are bad. Stay independent. Good night, fam.
Good night.